Well, to pick up where we left off, we're going to try this part 3 video again, looking at France and absolutism. France, of course, as we were talking about, being the best example of an absolutist monarchy. So we're going to look at really how they were able to develop this power and how they were able to lay that foundation of power. So what McKay kind of talks about is he disputes a little bit the notion that in order to create an absolute monarchy, you have to destroy checks, and rather he claims that there was some negotiation going on. This kind of shows a debate that exists with historians in regards to absolute monarchies in France. Did the Bourbons negotiate with other Czechs, or were they able to completely just subjugate the Czechs on their power, mainly the church and the nobility? And that's something still up to debate. In any case, they're able to consolidate power into their hands. So we're going to kind of look as we go through here and look at the Bourbon dynasty and see how they're able to do it. Of course, they're able to control the clergy because they made a deal. The Bourbons made a deal with the Pope. You have the ability to appoint a French clergy, French bishops, and that, of course, you stuff the clergy and the first estate full of people that are loyal to you. You also find ways to negotiate with the nobility. You decrease their taxes. The nobility basically pay virtually no taxes in this regime, but at the same time, you can see how they're able to pacify the nobility as well. And so I think there's values in both those arguments, whether it's negotiating within the existing system or really just kind of subjugating the existing system to the power. The end result is the consolidation of all political power into the hands of the Bourbon kings and those absolutist monarchs. So when we look at the foundations of absolutism, certainly Richelieu is a big part of that, as we've seen already in his consolidating that power while he was serving as regent for Louis XIII. Richelieu really believed that his main role was to glorify and empower the crown at the head of the French state. He's not entirely what we would think of as although a cardinal, completely just a Catholic ideologue. Rather, he is very secular in the sense that he wants to empower the French state. He wants to empower the French monarchy. And to some extent, the French monarchy is the head of the Gallican Church, of the French Catholic Church. So in a way, I guess he could justify that. But it's really his steps, as we looked at, and we looked at the political testament and his actions when we were looking at Wars of Religion, 30 Years' War, that really does empower that Bourbon dynasty and turns it into an absolute monarchy. And I think the first and foremost place that he looked at to remove that check is within the nobility, because as we've seen in the Middle Ages in Europe, it's the nobility is certainly the most powerful check over monarchs in Europe. And so what Richelieu decides to do is to look at ways to pacify them, to strengthen the political power of the Bourbons, and to weaken the power of the Habsburgs. So what Richelieu did was, of course, he had to build up that bureaucracy. We said the 2 steps to create an absolutist monarchy, an absolutist state, is the building up of bureaucracy and large standing armies. And Richelieu, what he did was he used royal intendants to collect information, deliver orders. Those have been built up. He appoints robe nobility. People from the growing middle class and the commercial revolution can buy into the nobility. They can get title. And what you're doing is you're essentially building up a group of people that run your government, that run your bureaucracy, that owe their status within your country to you. And that's exactly what the robe nobility are. He also felt that he needed to strengthen that position of the king at the head of the church, and that loyalty to the king is also loyalty to the church. And so, although we had the Edict of Nantes, we're going to slowly see a reversal of that Edict of Nantes, going all the way to Louis XIV's revocation of the Edict of Nantes. Richelieu was part of that step. He reasserted the idea of unity through faith and attacked Huguenot cities. He destroyed their fortifications and weakened Protestant nobility, keeping in mind that a large chunk of the nobles were Protestant. So in that sense, we can see how Richelieu, in a way, is kind of destroying the old checks. As we get to Louis XIV, we're going to try to examine that argument of how he's working within the old system, how there's some sort of negotiation. But either way, we're going to see the nobility stripped of their power. Richelieu's foreign policy, of course, as we saw when we looked at 30 Years' Wars, the destruction of the Habsburgs, at least of their power. Even though they're Catholic, he sides with Protestants in that conflict because he sees the weakening of the Habsburgs as strengthening the Bourbons in France. And the Bourbons are, when Richelieu's in power, are in a difficult position. If you look at the Spanish Netherlands, Spain, and then Austrian Habsburgs, for the most part, the Bourbons have this sense that they're being surrounded by the Habsburgs. And so where the interests of the state are concerned, God absolves actions which, if privately committed, would be a crime, as Richelieu says. So I think that kind of reinforces the idea that as the king rules with divine right, he's above the natural law, and he's justified. The ends kind of justify the means. And he truly felt that and in consolidating power in the hands of the Bourbons. So Mazarin is going to pick up for this. Louis XIII, of course, is going to reign on his own. When he dies, his son Louis XIV is too young to rule for himself, and so he's appointed Mazarin, student of Richelieu, is appointed as the regent for Louis XIV, who's going to become the greatest of all absolute monarchs, and is going to earn the title the Sun King, as if everything that he shines upon is his. It is Louis XIV that famously says, "I am the state." And there is no greater profession of your absolute power than that statement. The key event that occurs for Mazarin, though, is a period known as the Fronde. This was an uprising due to actions taken to raise money for war with Spain. It began with the robe nobility and spread to the sword nobility. And for the most part, it was a rebellion. And I think, as you read about the Fronde, and McKay won't get into too much detail, but the key here is the lesson that was learned by Mazarin from the Fronde and passed on to Louis XIV. And this illustrates a need for a strong leadership and order, but also the need for compromise with the nobility. How can you consolidate power in the hands of the king and have the nobility okay with that, have the nobility go along with that? And so that's really what they got to do. And the answer really lies in the wealth of the nobility. How can you create a nobility that is happy with their position and really don't desire political power? And the solution to that, of course, is partly in taxation. So what happens in the reign of Louis XIV that we're going to see is that he's going to find a way to keep the nobles happy and at the same time keep them weak. And it's Louis XIV that really reaches the pinnacle of absolutism in France. It is the longest reign in European history, sometimes confused with Queen Victoria, but if we look at the reign of Louis XIV, he actually reigns from 1643 to 1715. People are born, live their entire lives under the reign of Louis XIV, and his claim to his divine right to rule as an absolutist king. And by the time he takes the throne, there truly is no checks on his power anymore. The nobility are going to be subjected. They're going to be removed from their base of their power. The church is going to be loyal to him, and he's going to have the final say in all actions that happen in the state. The only check really that's on his power anymore is his ability to raise money, and that really is going to be the downfall. Because to buy off the nobility, to buy off the church, to buy off that first and second estate, he basically excuses them from all taxes. There are small fees, it's not entirety, but there's small fees that are placed on them, but they're insignificant. And so you have there are huge wealth disparity in France under his reign. It's going to be interesting that to buy off the nobility and to keep giving them tax exemptions, although he continues to spend more money on his armies, on his wars, and on his bureaucracy, that he's going to excuse the greatest wealth from paying taxes. And there's a great lesson to see in that. When you do that, when you have a problem when you're spending more than you're taking in, you're going to create debt. Louis XVI didn't have a choice. If he was going to be an absolute ruler and expand his government, he was going to have to spend more. If he was going to engage in his wars of expansion, he was going to have to spend more. But the way that he found to pacify the nobility and to maintain his court at Versailles and to engage in this standing army and to keep all these robe nobles and intendants and others working for him in his bureaucracy was to spend a lot of money, but he was exempting the greatest wealth. The majority of the taxable wealth of the state is in the hands of an elite that aren't paying taxes. There's a great wealth gap in France, much like today, where you have a small percentage of the population controlling a majority of the wealth, leaving a very large majority of the population, in the case of into the 90% in French population, living off a very small sliver of the wealth, and they have very little to give. And so that's really a foreshadow is to consolidate this power. It's short-lived because in order to do so, he sets himself up for massive debt. Had he decided to tax the nobility heavier, to tax even church holdings, he would have found himself facing much what happened in the Fronde, maybe facing rebellion, and that's what he feared. In the end, though, not doing that is going to face a greater rebellion when we get to the French Revolution. And we'll talk more about that. And so we're going to pick up on Louis XIV's system of absolutism a little bit more in the next video. We're going to look at how he was able to execute it, and then in the subsequent videos we'll look at the culture of his absolutism there, as well as the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, which is a big act of consolidating religious power within his hands.